All right, let me inquire of the court reporter here. You want to take a break for a minute?
I can keep going, yes.
Why don't we take a 10-minute break here, take a recess, let him catch his breath, and I understand we've got at least one more witness. Is that? Thank you. Please be seated. All right, we'll go back on the record. This is case CR 22-211623, State versus Chad Daybell. We took a mid-morning break. Ms. Smith, do you have another witness to call?
Yes, Sheriff Humphreys, Your Honor.
Very well. Sheriff Humphreys, if you would please step forward, pause, and raise your right hand. I'll have the clerk place you under oath.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you will give in the pending cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, thank you, Sheriff. You can be seated in the witness box there, and once he's situated, you can inquire counsel.
Forgot to move my mic. Good morning. Good morning. Could you state your name and occupation for the record, please?
My name is Len Humphreys. I'm the Fremont County Sheriff.
How long have you been the Fremont County Sheriff?
This is my 13th year.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
I've worked in law enforcement for 30 years. I achieved basic, intermediate, advanced certificates, and in 2013 earned my executive certificate through Idaho Post.
And what does that mean?
Executive certificate, that means that's typically certification that is for sheriffs, chiefs. That means lots of hours of training, years of experience on the job.
And so let me ask, what are the duties of a sheriff in Idaho?
So besides law enforcement, patrol, search and rescue, we also take care of the jails. We're responsible for courtroom security. That's pretty much.
When you say law enforcement, does that include investigations into criminal behavior, suspected criminal behavior inside the jurisdiction of Fremont County?
It does.
And specifically in the Daybell case, did the investigators from Fremont County ultimately report to you?
Yes, they do.
And are you personally responsible for planning and budgeting for the Fremont County Sheriff's Office's expenses attributable to the Daybell case?
Yes, I am. We're going through our budget process currently.
Okay. Now, did you do any research on what a change of venue to Ada County would cost your office on the Daybell case?
Yes, we did.
Okay. What research did you do?
Well, we received a request for an estimate of what it would cost us. We didn't have a lot to go on, and so our first estimate was what I considered a worst case scenario. If we had to provide security for the courtroom, if we had to provide security for the jurors, if we had to do everything, like as if we were here. And since that time, we received information from Ada County that most of those things would not apply. And so our original estimate was way off.
Okay. And the original estimate, had you had a brief conversation with the sheriff in Ada County?
I have spoken with him a couple of times, and also have spoken with Lieutenant Ruby on a couple of occasions.
And initially, was the sheriff able to give you any idea of what he would absorb and what you had to do?
Not originally.
Okay. And then sometime after March 1st, you got different information?
Just as recently as last week.
Okay. And specifically last Tuesday?
Yes.
And last Tuesday was the first numbers you got out of Ada County? That's
correct.
Okay. And we've heard that testimony, so I'm not going to ask you to go down that road, but I am going to ask you, if the Ada County Sheriff decides to bill Fremont County, are you obligated to pay that bill?
Well, probably so, but typically that would probably run from commissioners to commissioners.
Okay. And so while the sheriff can absorb cost, in the end, the commissioners can choose to bill.
That's a question I'm not sure about.
Okay. So, and so did you initially put together an estimate that is now way off?
That's correct.
And so we've withdrawn that estimate. All right. Now, do you have a final answer from the Ada County Sheriff's Office about what costs are going to be to Fremont County for a complete change of venue?
Well, I wouldn't say that they were entirely complete. I know that there's some questions about sequestering a jury and who would take care of that. I know that their numbers for overtime costs are significant, and looking at them, it would probably be cheaper for us to provide that team for taking care of a jury.
Okay. And so is that a conversation that's ongoing between your office and the sheriff in Ada County?
It really is. It's premature to even know which way that will go at this point.
Okay. And so when we're talking about these costs to Ada County, we're not talking, let me rephrase, I apologize. The numbers that have been given to the court in terms of the cost from Ada County, that would be in addition to the normal cost of the Daybell trial to Fremont County.
Yes.
Okay. So sort of switching gears a bit, there's been some talk about sort of handling of a trial like the Daybell case in Fremont County. Do you, as the sheriff, have concerns about your department and Fremont County's ability to handle the Daybell trial?
No.
Why not?
We have great people who work here. They are very familiar with the process and procedures, well-trained, well-experienced. We have sufficient staff to deal with it. It would be a strain on us in some areas, but we do have the personnel here who are capable and willing and able to do it.
And so, speaking of that, have you had experience in having to, say, have secure parking for jurors?
Yes, we have done that in the past.
Okay. And without getting into, I don't want to get too much into operational details because that undermines security, but were there arrangements made for, say, the grand jurors to park securely and get to the courthouse undisturbed by media?
Yes, we have done that in the past. We've done that for jurors. We've done that for prosecutors. We've done that for defense attorneys.
And do you have sort of plans on how you keep the courthouse secure and keep witnesses secure?
We do.
And do you have methods and entrances to allow people to come and go securely if need be?
Yes, we do.
Absolutely right. Now, you mentioned a potential strain here. Would it be more of a strain if the trial is over in Ada County?
Yes.
Why?
Well, because I'll have personnel who are not here that normally would be doing their normal jobs. They would be in Ada County, therefore not available to do their normal jobs.
Okay. So, for example, you had detectives that were primary investigators on, especially into the investigation into the death of Tammy Daybell, correct?
That's correct.
And are they part of your detective unit?
Yes, we have 3 detectives. 2 of them, as well as my lieutenant, were very involved with the investigation of Tammy Daybell.
And so if they were to be gone for 10 to 5 weeks, or even having to be available, what sort of impact would that have on your department and your detective bureau?
Well, that would leave 1 detective to cover everything, which could make things a little busy for him.
Okay. And are we safe to assume there'd be overtime costs?
Very likely.
But we can't project.
There's no way to judge that.
Okay. And if the jury were picked in Ada County but back to Fremont County, what, if any, impact would that have on your manpower?
Well, in one aspect, it would help our manpower. We would still need to provide security for the jury, which would involve several officers every day, but since they live here, they'd be able to go home off shift, and that would be easier for us to do than over there.
When you say off shift, could you stagger shifts to accommodate the sequestration?
Well, we can, and we usually work 12-hour shifts, and so that rotation would be fairly easy to work out.
Okay. And so if the trial were here in terms of sequestration cost to the sheriff's office, could you accommodate it with your existing resources?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Ms. Smith. Mr. Pryor, cross-examination.
Good morning, officer. Good morning, Sheriff. How much experience do you have in handling a jury that's been sequestered?
Not very much.
Well, not very much or none at all.
We've had a couple of juries, but they were just during deliberation after the sentence was provided.
And what we are talking about is sequestering a jury for possibly 10 weeks. You understand that, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I noticed today when I came in that there are a number of police officers here today. You have a significant amount of your police force in this courthouse right now, don't you?
I have several deputies here, yes.
Well, it's more than several deputies. You have the vast majority of your police force around this courtroom right now, don't you?
Probably about half.
Okay. Now, you noted that it would be easier for your deputies if the trial was here, correct?
Yes.
Okay. How easy would it be for a jury of 16 people to sit in a hotel for 10 weeks?
I couldn't speak to that.
Right. Now, we would also need to provide security around the courthouse during this trial. You would agree that the tone has been elevated in this community, right?
This has drawn a lot of interest.
And there's been some anger, right?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Okay. Well, there's a reason why you have, half. I counted, but my number may be different than yours. But a significant amount of your police officers are here today for a hearing. You would agree with me that when the trial takes place for 10 weeks, you're still going to have a significant number of your police officers at the courthouse, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And if you do 12-hour shifts, have you looked at the idea of how many shifts you're going to need for a jury being sequestered for 10 weeks and the manpower that's going to involve in Fremont County?
We have looked at some of those numbers, yes.
Okay. And you've calculated out 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week.
That's what we run all of the time.
But in addition to having your security staff here, you're also going to have to staff a separate staff of people who are going to watch the jurors 24 hours a day for 10 weeks, right?
We will provide that service as needed.
Right. Now, there are no hotels in, well, I guess there's one hotel in St. Anthony, right?
There's one.
Yeah. Is that going to be sufficient to house 16 to 18 jurors?
That will be up to the courts to decide where they house them.
Okay. And again, you don't have any input about providing security in Rexburg or Idaho Falls?
I expect that I would have some input, yes.
Okay. And as part of your input, would you prefer Rexburg or Idaho Falls?
I think Rexburg has facilities that would be adequate for what we need.
There's about 6 hotels. You're going to be able to plan with the hotel to rent out the entire hotel for sequestering a jury?
That'll be up to the courts to make those arrangements.
And as far as providing security for these jurors, you're going to be responsible for providing them at least with some social activities as well during the time that they're locked up for 10 weeks?
I haven't discussed that.
Okay. And you haven't discussed, well, let's put it this way. How many officers a day do you anticipate are going to be needed to provide security services for 18 jurors during the trial on a daily basis?
With 12-hour shifts, we would need at least 6 officers
Okay. At least, right? Every day?
every day.
How many sworn officers do you have?
With the jail staff and patrol, we are at about 21.
Okay. How many are at the jail?
9.
That leaves 12 officers, right?
No, we have more than 12. I'm sorry. I've got 15 patrol deputies, 3 detectives, 2 school resource officers, a Marine deputy, as well as a recreational officer.
So by my count, 22. And you said that today there are half of your staff here today, so it'll be 22. We have 10 or 11 officers here today, correct?
Yes.
And then the remaining 10 would be completely responsible for providing security at the, for the jury, right? In rotating 12-hour shifts?
We would rotate through, and there's other agencies that I can call upon to help us.
And that would cause additional costs, right?
Very likely.
They wouldn't do that out of the kindness of their heart, correct?
No.
But you haven't looked at that, correct?
Not yet.
And you haven't put together a plan as to whether or not, in the event there's some sort of disturbance, because it's not going to be difficult for some of these folks out here to find out where the jurors are. Small community, right?
It is a small community,
And
but we do have plans that we've already discussed.
okay, so we have 6 hotels in Rexburg. Not going to take a rocket scientist to figure out which one of these hotels the jurors are going to be at, right?
I wouldn't speak to that.
Right. But you're going to bus them from Rexburg or Idaho Falls every day, there and back, as part of the security cost of this case, correct?
Yes,
And you're going to have to feed them, correct?
that's correct.
And you're going to have to provide them entertainment, is that correct?
That is an area that we haven't talked about.
Okay, and you're going to have to take away their communications and cell phones and anything that would potentially cause them some sort of ability to look into some of the facts of this case, right? You're going to have to do that as well, right?
I will do whatever the judge asks us to do.
Okay. And in the event there's some sort of vigil or protest or something like that, have you taken consideration as to whether or not in Rexburg, Idaho, with the 6 hotels, that in the event there's some sort of vigil or other disturbance where the jurors are being housed, do you have plans for addressing that concern if that should happen?
There's a lot of things that can happen, and we've addressed many of them yet to be addressed.
And
But
you would agree with me that...
Objection. He needs to be allowed to answer his
He
question.
wasn't finished with his answer there, Mr. Pryor, so.
Sorry.
a lot of things we don't know about yet. It's too premature to even begin to guess, but a lot of it has been talked about.
But frankly, we can't really put a thumb on what the costs are because we really don't know. There's a lot of things that we just can't predict. You would agree with that, right?
A lot of it is unknown.
Right. Judge, I have nothing else. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pryor. Any redirect?
Very briefly, in Fremont County, it's a very large county, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. There's also resorts and bed and breakfast and recreational properties in and around Fremont County.
Many of them.
Okay. And there's been no approaches of anybody, but that is an option that Fremont County would explore as well for the jurors.
I believe that's correct.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you on that very limited redirect. Any recross, Mr. Pryor?
So what you're suggesting then is that we're going to put these jurors in a resort for 10 weeks just to make it comfortable for them? Is that what we're talking about?
I didn't make that suggestion. I said those are available.
Okay. And you would have the security to shut down a resort so that jurors wouldn't have any contact with outside influences while they're deciding what to do in this case?
Would probably be easier there than at a hotel.
And as far as cost, you've read Lieutenant Travis Ruby's, he's, for all practical purposes, anything within the normal realm of a trial in Ada County is going to be covered completely by Ada County. You understand that, right?
Yes, I do.
All right, nothing else, Judge. Thank you.
All right, thanks. That will conclude your testimony then, Sheriff Humphreys. Thank you for appearing today. state have any further witnesses to call?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Pryor, does the defense have witnesses to call for this hearing today?
Judge, nothing, thank you.
All right, well, if that concludes submission of testimony, evidence, counsel, do you want to present closing arguments on the matter, or do you want to submit a written closing argument? I'll leave it to the discretion of the parties.
Before we do a brief closing argument, could the state request, I believe we discussed it in chambers, that Mr. Archibald address Ms. Vallow's request for change of venue? The state had originally asked for a continuance of today's hearing, not because we needed more time, but because we really wanted a complete record with regard to Ms. Vallow's change of venue motion. I know he's here today. I know that Mr. Pryor made representations in his objection to our continuance motions, and I think to avoid any allegations long-term of ineffective assistance of counsel that somehow Mr. Archibald failed to raise it in a timely manner, it would be, we would request and suggest to the court that it's appropriate that he speak to Ms. Vallow's change of venue motion, whether they want to be heard at this time.
All right, well, that's a matter that is outside of the scope of the noticed hearing for today. I will allow it, but I'm only going to do that at the total conclusion of the hearing. So if there's a closing argument or statement to be made, you can do that at this time, and I'll let the state do that first. Mr. Pryor, do you prefer to have a oral closing argument, or do you want to submit something in writing?
Judge, my preference is to present oral closing arguments. I think the court needs to make a decision and make a decision very quickly, given the short time frame we have for the trial in this case.
Very well. I'll hear closings then from the state first, and then Mr. Pryor.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state recognizes that the court's in a very difficult position, and we really appreciate the opportunity to present the economic impact. The people of Fremont County and Madison County, since this is a joint prosecution, have an interest in having the crimes that occur within their jurisdiction heard in that jurisdiction. And the Idaho legislature and the courts have developed a method that allows the court to achieve both the ability of Mr. Daybell to have a fair and impartial jury, and the jurisdictions that have an interest in the crimes that occur there to hear those cases. And that's under Idaho Code 19-1816. We would ask you to follow it. The state has met those standards. We've shown you that it's more economical to try the case in the county of origin than it is to try it, 300 miles or 200 plus miles across the state. Now, are some of the numbers budget projections? Absolutely, but as the court is well aware, trials are not scripted. We can't come in and tell you it's going to take exactly this long and it's going to take exactly this minutes, and we can't tell you that this particular detective is only going to testify once. We can plan, we work for every contingencies, but trials are not a play that we can write out and hand to the court. What we have to do is plan for contingencies. We have to have witnesses available, and when the judge turns to us as prosecutors and says, call your next witness, that next witness better be there. And having the trial 200 plus miles away puts us in a position where we have to make these people who normally we could pick up the phone and say, get here in 10 minutes. Like, we can't do that if it's across the state in Ada. We have to be able to present our case the way we need to present it, and that means having essential witnesses who worked on an investigation for going on 2 years now available to us. I am very confident that if a judge has a jury sitting there for a trial of 10 weeks, jury selection of an additional 2, and he turns to us and says, hey, call your next witness, there's not going to be a lot of time given, and I understand that, to get somebody across the state. So we have had to have some of the primary detectives on call, and thank goodness those agencies, Madison County Sheriff, the Rexburg PD, the Sheriff for Fremont County, all of those offices had said, yes, you get what you need to do this case right. And if that means we pull people across the state and have them sit there so that we don't inconvenience the court, so we don't slow down the juries, then that's what we'll do, and we'll plan for that budget. When we're planning our budget, we're planning it so that we can move this case forward and get justice for these victims. That doesn't mean we can ask the court to have people drive across the state and wait on us. And so some of those projections are so that those people can be available when needed, so that as issues pop up, they can investigate them. And you can't have that done on the fly by someone who doesn't know the case. So as we're putting together our budget projections, we're putting together how to put the best case forward to the court wherever we try it. understanding that we need detectives who know the case, who know the evidence, available to us quickly, that is easier to do if it's tried in Fremont or in the alternative Madison County. If the court would allow us to try the case there, people could sleep in their own bed, the departments wouldn't have overtime, the defendants could stay in the jail they are in right now. Lori Vallow would have access to both of her counsel. Trying it in Fremont County is the best thing all around, especially considering the economic impact. The court has decided that it's fair to Mr. Daybell and therefore Ms. Vallow that we pick a jury for somewhere else. I understand that and respect that, but the court now has the ability to say, okay, I will allow the state to try the case in a way that doesn't cost the people in this area an exorbitant amount above and beyond what they've already invested. You have the opportunity to allow the people here to hear their case. The other piece that I want to point out, that there's no constitutional right to try your case in a particular courthouse. The constitutional right is to have the people hearing your case be fair and impartial. The constitutional right is to have a jury of your peers who can judge you based on the evidence presented in that courtroom only. It has nothing to do whether you get to pick a pretty courthouse or one that tries a lot of murder cases. It has to do with you need to be in the place where you committed the crime with people who can be fair and impartial. And the court has the ability to do that.
Well, Ms. Smith, the people that will be picking are the jurors, and the jurors will be from Ada County.
Correct.
So it sounds like you're arguing that the people from here should be the ones listening to and deciding the case.
I apologize. I was being, if that's true, that was, I was saying the court has accomplished by picking a fair and impartial jury from Ada. Now we're asking you to bring those people from Ada here to let the evidence in this jurisdiction be heard from the place it was collected. This is where those people died. This is where those people were killed and buried. This is where the trial needs to be. And the agencies involved have worked out an amazing partnership. They've worked really closely together. They've dedicated scores of hours of resources. Those people should be allowed to be able to work and do their normal job and be available to the prosecution in the state when we need them. And the best way to accomplish that is to do that here in the Fremont County Courthouse. You know, we've all traveled, you know, I know the courts traveled to Ada County. I've traveled to Ada County, see that courthouse. The fact that a courthouse might be prettier or technically bigger isn't what the statute contemplates. The fact that more murders happen in Ada County isn't what the statute contemplates. Under that standard, every murder case should get transferred to Ada. This isn't about what courthouse is prettier, who has more staff. This is about, can we deliver Mr. Daybell's constitutional rights, Mrs. Daybell's constitutional rights, and allow the people in the jurisdiction that help do the investigation to hear the case. And you have the tools to do that, and we're asking you to do that.
All right, thank you, Ms. Smith. And I'll just note for the record, I actually think this is a prettier courthouse than Ada County's, and I'm not going to take deciding, and I mean that sincerely, but Mr. Pryor, if you'd like to present your closing, you may.
Judge, I think Ms. Smith misunderstands the standard. This court made a decision regarding venue. I don't have to remind the court the voluminous nature of the exhibits that I submitted to the court. They were voluminous, and there was quite a bit of media attention. There were vigils. There were at the very courthouse where she wants to have the trial now in Madison. That courthouse and the commissioners allowed ribbons to be put up on courthouse property until I had a hearing, and suddenly and ironically, right after that hearing, Madison County pulls down all of the advertising on there, and the lady across the street selling
Judge, I'm going to have to object. He's assuming and arguing facts, not in evidence. And there's no evidence that that's true.
There's been nothing presented as to that, Mr. Pryor, so just stick with the facts of this hearing, please.
Well, I guess when she was talking about the pretty nature of Ada County, I don't remember that testimony either, Judge, but that's okay. We'll move on. Judge, the memorandum decision you issued in this case talks about the nature and the level of intensity that's surrounding this case. And Mr. Daybell is entitled to a fair and impartial trial. And that fair and impartial trial just doesn't mean that when he shows up because all of the deputies happen to be here, that the jury gets to listen to it and everything goes as planned and there's no problems with the jury, the process and everything else. Fair and impartial also means that when the juror is being sequestered for 10 weeks in a hotel in Rexburg, Idaho, that they're not subjected to some unnecessary media attention or unnecessary vigils or unnecessary protests or anything else. And given the magnitude, and all my exhibits have been admitted, Judge, they've been admitted in this case, and the court can go back and review it and review your memorandum decision about how much attention was drawn here. And if anyone shows up where the jurors are being sequestered, and that's not going to be a big secret, Judge, it's going to be real easy to figure out. And there's protests, and there's influence, and there's manipulation, and there's difficulties with that, we're going to be right back again doing this all over again. And that's not fair, that's not impartial. The other concern is this, Judge. I'm a citizen of Ada County. Now, I'm obviously not going to be picked as a juror in this case. But if I was picked for a jury duty and someone told me that, yeah, we're going to pick a jury in Ada County, and by the way, after we're done picking you, and whether you're selected and you like it or not, you're now going to be transported to Fremont County, away from your family. We're going to take away your phones. We're going to take away access and communication. We're going to take away everything involved. And we're going to lock you up in a hotel for 10 weeks, and you're going to listen to testimony, and the rest of the time you're going to be in the hotel with, you can't have TV. That would be undue influence. You can't have your phone. That would be undue influence. You can't have anything. And whether it's a resort in Fremont County or whether it's a hotel in Rexburg, you are taking 16 to 18 people from the community in Ada County, and you are locking them up in a hotel because of a jury trial. Now, I submitted a memorandum to the court, and I addressed in that memorandum the concerns that come about as a result of those situations, and jurors that have a tendency to come to judgment very quickly when they are put in that situation. This case is not about turning 16 to 18 jurors into prisoners in a hotel in Rexburg, Idaho for 10 weeks. This is about a fair and impartial trial. And I'm sorry, Ms. Smith and Ms. Blake, that this county has to pay all of these costs. It wasn't my decision to seek the death penalty. It was their decision. And they made that decision taking into account what was going to transpire. And this court, and rightfully so, moved venue to Ada County. Now, I get, at least from my perspective, Judge, some of the costs that they have addressed here seem a bit inflated. But it doesn't matter what the costs are. It doesn't make any difference what the costs are, because that's not what the consideration is. Costs are only one factor. And Ms. Smith seems to suggest that cost is the entire factor, Judge, for flipping this thing. And that's not what the standard is. The standard is whether or not Mr. Daybell gets a fair and impartial trial. That's where you start. The inconveniences to everybody else. I'm going to have to travel over here. And when I get co-counsel, he's going to have to travel over here. And granted, Mr. Archibald and his co-counsel will be able to see Ms. Vallow whenever he wants over here. But when I'm over there with Mr. Daybell and my co-counsel, I'll be able to see Mr. Daybell. So, you know, it's basically the same thing. But you can't take consideration of cost. I'm sorry Fremont County has to pay this. If they are upset about the cost, then go to these prosecutors and say, why did you seek the death penalty? Why did you do it in this case, and knowing that this was going to be an exorbitant expense? And I'm sorry it's an exorbitant expense. But when you're having a case like this, of this magnitude, and frankly, Judge, this is a huge case. There are people from all over the country here. Some of the faces I recognize, but they're not here because this is a regular case. They're here because this is a high-profile case. And in the court's own words, when you cited it in a couple of your memorandums, death is different. The magnitude of this case warrants that we take every step necessary to ensure that there's no bias towards the jury, that the jury is not manipulated in any way, and Mr. Daybell, Chad gets an opportunity to present his case without all of those outside factors. And I can't fathom how they would not have an impact on the jury when you lock them up for 10 weeks, people from Ada County. I can't fathom how there isn't going to be a vigil or there isn't going to be some sort of protest or anything else, given the exhibits that I previously submitted, when they lock them up in this hotel. And I don't agree with any of the numbers they presented. Frankly, I think they're padding all of them. And I think, I think it's just a situation where they want to be comfortable. And I'm sorry they're uncomfortable, but we're all going to be uncomfortable. And at this point, Judge, the magnitude of this case, the seriousness of this case, and I understand it's an expense. And Judge, but you have to look at, we've all been sworn in as lawyers, and the primary responsibility is not the cost of things. The primary objective of all of us is the administration of justice. I have a job to do, the prosecutor has a job to do. But more importantly, Judge, you have a job to do. And unfortunately, that may be a situation where you're going to have to say, I'm sorry, Fremont County, but the magnitude of this case is so serious. The magnitude of this case is it's one of the biggest cases in the country. And I think to be on the safe side, even though as a judge, you're saying I'm aware of the cost, but given the magnitude of the case, we have to have it in Ada County because we cannot afford to have to go through this again. And that is a concern, because if there is a problem and there is a difficulty, we're going through this again. And given that, Judge, I would respectfully ask that this court deny their motion. It makes far more sense to not impose such a significant burden on jurors and risk manipulation or some sort of intimidation or otherwise on a jury when you bring them here in a small community. I would respectfully ask this court to deny their motion.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pryor. The matter will be considered submitted, and I'll take it under advisement for issuance of a written ruling. At this time, there's one additional issue we'll bring up then. As was previously noted by the prosecution, Mr. Archibald, if you'd like to come forward, I do want to address the issue as it relates to your case and your client. I'll just note on the record here, there's a co-companion case, CR 22-21-1624, which is State versus Lori Vallow Daybell. That case is scheduled for an arraignment to take place a little later this afternoon. The case has been stayed. As I just mentioned, she hasn't been arraigned yet. So procedurally, however, there was a motion to sever that was filed by previous counsel, not by you, Mr. Archibald. The court has issued some rulings in that case and this case that would indicate the trials to be combined in one single trial for both defendants. That's the current posture of both cases. This issue then, Mr. Archibald, I don't know if you've had enough time to consult with your client. This matter could be heard independently in your case. You certainly have that right, and I don't know if your client has any position to take on a argument for or against the state's request to transport a jury from Ada County to Fremont County for purposes of trial. So if you are willing and ready to address that issue at this time, you can do so on the record.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Vallow Daybell and I have reviewed the decision that came out in October of 2021. We reviewed that decision both in the mental hospital, and we've reviewed it since she has been sent back from the mental hospital to the local jail. She is in agreement and has been since I have met and consulted with her with the court's decision in October that venue is proper in Ada County, that the jury should be selected in Ada County, and that the trial should be held in Ada County. The motion to transport the jury back to Fremont County, I have also discussed with her that motion. She is of the opinion that the court's initial decision in October was correct, that the jury selection and the trial should be in Boise. On page 10 of the court's decision, my client and I believe that the court previously addressed this, that the court addressed the courthouse facilities, the required personnel, courtroom availability, multi-week high-profile case, ability to house and transport in-custody defendants, control of citizen and media attendance, jury security and accommodations. That we have talked about that and reviewed that. We believe the court's decision is correct. And so we, as far as our change of venue, we believe that our motion was granted, even though our case was stayed at the time. The motion to transport the jury, we would ask the court to deny that the jury should be kept in Ada County. Whether or not they're sequestered during the entire trial or just during jury deliberations, that question is not ripe yet. I would note this is about my 30th homicide case that I've worked on. I have tried cases in this courtroom. I have gone to Boise and selected a jury and brought them back. And my experience is that when juries are sequestered during trial, it's not a pleasant experience. And so I still may constitutionally be required to ask for the jury's sequestration, but in my experience, bringing them to Fremont County in the middle of winter is a bad idea. I've been here in jury trials while it's in the winter. I've been here in trials in January and February, and I've been here when the schools close and the roads close, and there's a reason that this area is so popular with winter recreation, is because it snows a lot here. So to have a high-profile case that extending multiple weeks in Fremont County, Idaho, where it's guaranteed to snow and snow and snow some more in January and February of 2023 would, in my opinion, not be wise. I agree that the state, in bringing the death penalty, it guarantees additional costs that are not required during a homicide case where the death penalty is not sought. I have tried both death penalty cases and I've tried murder cases where the death penalty is not sought. And I can attest to the added burden and the added costs for both the state and the defense when the death penalty is sought. The voir dire process is longer, the trial is longer, the sentencing is longer, the appeals are longer, the scrutiny from the appellate courts are longer when the death penalty is sought. So with the capital murder case, if the state is so concerned about money, the remedy is simple. Don't file the death penalty. If they choose to file the death penalty, they got to be ready to pay for it. And they got to pay for it, and it's going to cost a lot. So with the government in control of whether the death penalty is sought or not sought, then they have elected that they're going to spend that money. Half of the states now in our union do not seek the death penalty, and the reason is, one of the reasons is because of the exorbitant costs and the endless appeals associated with these cases. Therefore, Your Honor, I respectfully ask the court not to bring the jury from Ada County to Fremont County.
All right, thank you, Mr. Archibald. And I'll note again, those are comments in the context of your case, which is 22-21-16-24. The court will take this all under advisement, and what I will expect then, Mr. Archibald, is based on your comments today, I wouldn't expect we'll be going through another contested hearing on this issue where it appears you have made your statement as it relates to this. Again, your case has been stayed, has not been arraigned yet, so to the extent this seems somewhat out of order, I'll I'll also note that this is limited on the sole issue of the state's motion today, which is a reconsideration of an order that we would not transport a jury. So that's what the court's considering, and the question of whether or not a jury would be sequestered is not yet determined by the court. So I appreciate your comments today. That will conclude the hearing then. The court will take this issue under advisement. We'll issue a written ruling in due course. At this time then, I will leave the bench. The defendant will be transported from the courtroom. I'd ask those in attendance to remain seated until such time as the marshals of the courtroom advise you that it's okay to stand up and exit the courtroom, and we'll be in recess.